Greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom alaikum. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. I have the difficult task of speaking at the end, after my respected panelists, at the end of the evening, on a most challenging topic. But before I begin, I would like to thank the organizers, Logos Christian Community, as well as the co-sponsors, Islamic Arts of York, Hillel at York, the Intercultural Dialogue Institute at York University, for the invitation and for bringing us together this evening. There is a well-known parable that is told in many of our religious traditions. It is the story of the elephant and the blind man. And the parable is related that in a distant village a long time ago, there lived 6 blind men. And one day the villager said that there's an elephant in the village. So the blind men, who had never seen or felt an elephant, decided that they would go and try to get a visual imagery of the elephant by feeling it. So they went down to the village, and the first blind man, he felt the leg of the elephant, and he said, "This is a pillar." The second blind man, he felt the tail of the elephant, and he said, "This is a rope." The third one, he felt the trunk of the elephant, and he said, "This is a tree." The one who felt the ear of the elephant, he said, "It feels like a hand fan." The one who felt the body of the elephant, he said, "This is a wall." And the one who felt the tusk of the elephant, he said, "This is a pipe." So they fell into this heated argument as to how to describe this elephant. And a wise man passed them by and he said, "Each of you have touched a part of the elephant's body, and you only have a partial view of the animal. But if you were to put all of your partial views together, you will get the whole picture of what the elephant is." This parable of the blind man and the elephant is often used to illustrate how biases can blind us, preventing us from seeing a more complete understanding of the reality of things. Very much like this parable, this topic that we're dealing with tonight, religion and violence, is steeped in biases, myths, and misrepresentations. Also, the title of tonight's event may have triggered certain word associations, may have reinforced certain perceptions. The word association could be religion and violence equal Islam. The perception could be that Islam is mostly a violent religion. The assumption that some of you may have is that all religions cause violence. So let me begin by addressing these. Yes, there is violence being committed within religions by a minority groups that have infected many societies. But claims that the savagery of this very tiny minority demonstrate that the religion of Islam is inherently a violent religion are not supported by evidence, history, or logic. In a recent article that is available online, slate.com, in an online magazine, written by Andrew Mack, under the title of The Truth About Islam, he writes, "Of course, Islam isn't a religion of violence. If it were, why would so many Muslim societies be so peaceful?" He goes on to say that discussions about the violence of contemporary Islam focus overwhelmingly on the political violence, on the armed conflicts. He goes on to say that a more appropriate measure for determining the propensity for violence of a particular culture, society, or religion is the incidence of intentional homicide, the incidence of murder. He says that in almost all societies, it is not war that accounts for the large majority of violence in that society, but it is intentional killings. He concludes that if there is an inherent Islamically driven propensity for deadly violence in Muslim societies, we should expect to find that the greater the percentage of Muslims in a society, the greater would be the violence. In fact, the reverse is true. The reverse is true. The higher the percentage of Muslims in a society, the lower the homicide rate. The lower the homicide rate. So this is the first myth that must be debunked, that Islam is an inherently violent religion. The second myth is that all religions have a history of violence. This is conventional thinking today, especially in our Western societies, that our religions are more inclined towards violence than institutions or ideologies that are identified as secular. You know, that prolific British writer and commentator, Karen Armstrong, in her book Fields of Blood, Religion and the History of Violence, she argues convincingly that religions have been made a scapegoat for violence. And she says we need to look at the meaning of religion in history. She says from the ancient days, religions have encompassed the political and tribal identities of people. Armstrong argues that the adventures, the violent adventures in our collective religious histories, whether they're the Crusades, the Inquisition, or the Muslim conquest, were wrapped in politics and economics. And she suggests that we, the people in the West, who dismiss violence as a backward byproduct of religion, we are being disingenuous, we're being lazy, self-serving, and self-righteous. And she says this, she says, blaming religion allows Westerners to ignore the essential role that violence has played in the formation of their own societies. And the essential role that our societies have played in seeding violence abroad. Let me say this again. She says that blaming religion allows Westerners to ignore the essential role that violence has played in the formation of our own societies today, and the essential role that our societies are playing in seeding violence abroad. Most conflicts and wars have nothing to do with religion. They're about power, they're about territory, they're about glory, they're about oil, geostrategic interests, things that are secular, even profane. Look at the last century, the most violent in human history. 2 major wars had nothing to do with religion. The third myth that was touched on by the previous panelists briefly is that our scriptures have texts that leads to violence. Yes, there are difficult texts in our scriptures. There are difficult texts in our scriptures. These verses were revealed in different times. They were revealed in the pre-modern age, in the biblical age, when there was a struggle for survival. Warfare, as Karen Armstrong says, was a desperate business. It was a desperate business in the times that our scriptures were revealed. No doubt all of us can go into our text, each other's text, and find quotations. We can do this. We can air each other's historical dirty laundry. When each of our communities have acted contrary to the objectives of our religions. But as the rabbi quoted from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, that all of us have that tradition of interpretation that have allowed us to read this difficult text into the larger context of coexistence, respect for difference, and a pursuit for peace. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks said in his book, with a similar title to our event tonight, Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence, he said fundamentalism, text without context, application without interpretation is not faith, but an aberration of it. But an aberration of it. And he goes on to say religiously motivated terror desecrates and defames religion itself. It is a sacrilege against God and the life he has endowed in his image. But let us move on beyond these biases and myths and misrepresentations. Our meeting here tonight is not a theological discussion. It is not for us to interpret each other's text. It is not to explain history. But it is to look forward. It is a call to action. To say not in God's name. To say not in God's name. To say that we are against religiously motivated violence. You know, at this point in our histories, in the second decade of the 21st century, we are being asked how we are behaving towards each other. We're being asked to take seriously not only our own perspectives, but that of others, to see the whole picture, to see the whole elephant. And we must seek to understand each other, to seek to understand each other's faiths as we would like it to be understood, as we would like it to be understood. So tonight, let me give you a personal testimonial of what my faith of Islam means to me and what it expects of me. My religion of Islam is asking me to surrender, to submit to God, to be at peace with Him, to be at peace with Him, with my fellow human beings, and with the other creation of God. Islam stands in the long line of the monotheistic traditions that share an uncompromising belief in the one God, that believe in God's revelations, that believe in His prophets, that promote ethical responsibility and accountability. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all children of Abraham, of Ibrahim. We are all cousins. We are all branches of the same family. Muslims, Christians, and Jews worship the same God, but in different ways. My religious life is punctuated with practices that is meant to lead me not to violence, but to Islam, to peace with God and with my fellow human beings. My essential duties as a Muslim ask me every day to affirm and to reaffirm that there is a God who is merciful and compassionate. I began today with a phrase that every Muslim says, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. We say this phrase at the beginning of every action that we do. This is the first phrase that our parents tell us to memorize. We're asked to memorize this phrase, this phrase, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. It is a commitment to engage in righteous conduct, to act in the name of the merciful and compassionate God. It is an etiquette of righteous beginnings. Every day, I have 5 scheduled appointments with God. I have 5 scheduled appointments with God. At these prayer appointments, I turn and I return to God, seeking His guidance, asking Him to keep me on a path of righteousness. I ask Him for forgiveness 5 times a day. I ask Him to grant me mercy, to guide me to the straight path. And every year I fast to get closer to God, to purify myself and my wealth from stinginess, and to help the less fortunate. This is how my religion gives meaning to my life. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks says, and as was quoted by the rabbi, the 21st century has left us with a maximum of choice and a minimum of meaning. Religion has returned because it is hard to live without meaning. One day a man came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, one of his followers, and he asked him this question. He said, tell me something about Islam I can ask of no one but you. Tell me something about Islam, this religion of yours, that I can ask of no one but you. And the Prophet responded and he said, say you believe in God and be upright. Say you believe in God and be upright. Believe in God and be a good person. The essential of religion. And one of our great men in history, within the religious tradition of Islam, he said the highest objectives of the religion of Islam are protection of life, protection of intellect, protection of faith, of one's lineage and property. This is Al-Ghazali. And Al-Ghazali says these are to be protected as absolute priorities. These 5 things are to be protected as absolute priorities. Let me tell you a secret, and all of the Muslims in the audience will notice. Every time a Muslim hears of a violent incident being committed anywhere in the world, the first thing we say and the first thing we pray, that it's not done in God's name, that it's not a Muslim. It's not done in the name of Islam. This is the first thing that we think of. And this response is a personal testimony that our faith does not teach us to engage in religiously motivated violence. And we instinctively find such acts abhorrent. Muslims throughout the world have been condemning the violence and the indiscriminate killings of innocent people we have been witnessing. There have been many statements, locally and internationally. Last week there was a conference in Marrakesh reaffirming once again the Muslim world's willingness to protect religious minorities. Islam is for life, not for taking life. Islam is for peace and coexistence, not for violence. There's a verse in the Quran where God says, believers, listen to God and the messengers when they call you to that which gives you life. When they call you to that which gives you life. So our religions, we have the internal resources to resist acts of violence done in the name of God. To summarize and conclude, most of the violence and conflicts and wars have nothing to do with religion. They are about power, territory, oil, glory, things that are secular. Our religions sustain us, sustain individuals and groups more effectively than any other organized force. It suppresses the violence within. It rises to the threat of violence without. And for us, people of faith, religion gives meaning to our lives. It teaches us to love one another, to cooperate and collaborate with one another, to work together, to achieve common goals for the common good. All of our religions have the golden rule to love for others what we love for ourselves. In conclusion, I conclude with a verse of the Quran, which is quoted actually in the sermons every week throughout the world. Every sermon that an imam gives, he begins his sermon. This is one of the verses he begins with. And the verse says, O mankind, be careful of your duty to your Lord, who created you from a single soul. Who created you from a single soul. This verse teaches us that our common humanity precedes our differences. We are all from a single soul. Our common humanity precedes our differences. And as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says, this common humanity must be the basis of any Abrahamic theology capable of defeating the false gods of violence. I leave you in peace with salam and shalom. Thank you.